Welcome to Negotiation with Alice, your negotiation podcast. Everything that you do where you need to get on the same page with someone else is a negotiation. So whether you have to negotiate a contract with someone, or you simply need your boss to sign off on that program that you'd like to implement, or you want to figure out how to rebalance the chore structure in your home, or talk about what vacation you want to go on. All of these things are negotiations. So in my podcast, we go over both personal and professional conversations, which all are considered negotiation, and I will give you tips on how to come out ahead. Welcome to the show. Welcome, listeners, to another episode of Negotiation with Alice. I've got an old friend here with me today, Jen Lee. Jen, who used to be in the Bay Area, and now you've moved a little bit further away. But welcome, Jen.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be joining you, Alice.
So let everyone know the kind of work that you're doing. I know that you used to work with people doing bankruptcy, and I believe you've shifted your practice. So talk a little bit about what you're doing.
I have shifted a bit. So I am a bankruptcy attorney. I'm still a licensed attorney in California and North Dakota, where I grew up. And what I really found I love doing, though, is helping lawyers figure out really cool business models, add bankruptcy as a practice area. So I'm really working with lawyers these days in non-traditional legal models. There's a lot of people out there who need help but can't afford like a high billable hour attorney. And there's so much opportunity for lawyers to help out in different ways. And so what I'm doing these days is just thinking outside the box, kind of a chief outsourced idea officer for law firms who are really trying to change the game and find new ways to work with clients and new partners in industries that they may not have partnered with in the past traditionally. So
it's very interesting. Are you like so niche that you're the only one doing this kind of work?
Yes. So I always joke because when I was a bankruptcy attorney, I never used the B word. I always said I was a debt and credit attorney, and it was a made up practice area. And so what I did when I went into the consulting side is I made up a new practice area. I haven't found anyone who's really doing what I'm doing. And I still do a lot of bankruptcy work with law firms and education because it's still a passion of mine. But it is very much an interesting area to be in where no one else does what I do.
New paths. I love it.
So fun.
Awesome. That's what we do as entrepreneurs, right?
Yes.
Is try to find a niche or a need, and we try to fill
exactly.
And so the reason why I asked Jen here today was really because of the intersection between what she does and psychology.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of, well, maybe you would argue that all of money is highly tied to people's emotional states around money, right? How you feel about money, how you think about money, the psychology of money. And, while there have been books about it and while people do talk about it, I don't feel like it's necessarily mainstream conversation about money and psychology, right? Like people who are going into bankruptcy probably are not talking much about their psychology of money. So I would love to sort of have that conversation, Jen, about what you've seen around how people negotiate with themselves and what things sabotage people with their money.
And it's really interesting how much my past life as a bankruptcy attorney crosses over into what I do now, because this whole psychology of money, I got really interested in as a bankruptcy attorney, because that's why I called myself a debt and credit attorney. That's why I never said bankruptcy, because the psychology of people is, oh my gosh, that's a horrible thing. No one would ever want to talk to you. And what I found was the people who talked to me earlier in the process had a better result because they didn't have that stigma. They didn't have this little thing in their brain that bankruptcy is an evil thing. And so when people are looking at money, a lot of people who end up in bankruptcy, the psychology of being so stressed, financial stress, I talk about this a lot as an illness almost, because there's studies and they all show that illness is related to stress. Like 70% of illness is stress related. And the number one cause of stress is finances. And so finances literally can make people sick. And it's almost the psychology of not wanting to deal with the problem. We don't talk about it. We stick our heads in the sand. And I was told that was not that you can't say it. Ostriches don't stick their heads in the sand or something, but I'm still going to say it. But we ignore things that we don't want to talk about, that are uncomfortable, that we think other people are looking down on us for. And I will say social media and the psychology of social media often plays into this too. Because when you go on Facebook, for us old people who are still on Facebook and not these new TikTok things or stuff like that, when you go on there, you see all these people posting only what they want you to see about their lives, how their vacation to Hawaii, their new car that they got. But they don't say, oh, by the way, we're in bankruptcy and we're leveraged to the hilt. So everyone thinks they're alone. Like, well, everyone else is succeeding. Why can't I? And I think that's one of the worst things that social media has done, is it allows you to be authentic if you want to be, but people only know what they see, what you put online. And so I did a lot of trying to educate people, I still do, on how you think about money and the things you do that you may not realize that you're doing with money because of these things we learned as children about money. So
there's so much to unpack here. So one of the things I want to mention is that, you mentioned that people are looking at what other people are doing, or maybe quote unquote affording on social media, when in fact, I'm sure you've seen this, as I as a divorce mediator, a lot of that stuff is leveraged through credit cards.
Yeah, totally. And that's why I always said I had an office in San Ramon, which is a fairly affluent area in the Bay Area. It's not super ritzy, but everyone's like, why do you have an office in San Ramon? Everyone has money there. And I'm like, yeah, my clients are also leveraged just like everyone else is. Their leverage is just higher because they were able to qualify for more lending at that point.
Right. Or they even do things like, I had a couple where they lost a lot of money because he got a HELOC to put into the stock market.
Yep.
And he dumped all that money to the stock market thinking, okay, my HELOC has a lower interest rate than what I envision that I will get in the stock market, which is maybe 7 to 10%. And maybe his interest rate on the mortgage on the HELOC was maybe, let's say, 4%. So he thought, I'll make the difference. And then he lost a lot of money. So then there was that huge debt that they had to divide up.
Yeah. And a lot of people see these things again on social media, or check these financial advice type things. And I see this is how the rich do it. And they tell you to like leverage crazy things or tax evasion and all kinds. I'm like, get your advice from a professional who has some kind of duty to you to give you good advice, and not TikTok, please. Sorry. Social media is on my radar today, apparently.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the psychology of it. So help us understand sort of like, how do the two things play hand in hand? Your own emotional feel towards money and how that plays out in your life.
So what I try to tell people, there's studies, there's all kinds of science that's been done behind how people think about money. And the way you think about money is usually set in your brain around the time that you're 6 or 7 years old. And so if you think back to when you were 6 or 7, what was going on with your family, you don't realize the things that were imprinted in. And parents always think, oh, we don't talk about money around our kids. They have no idea of our financial troubles. They know, I guarantee it. They don't know how to process it, but their subconscious is constantly processing it. When I was a kid, we had a car get repossessed, and that was very impactful in my brain of, always make your car payment on time because your car, that's what I learned from it. But I would say that so many people then think of money as a bad thing, that it caused problems in their lives. And so one of the cool tricks that a friend who was a coach over the years for me had us do in workshops. What's the first word you think of when you think of money? And it was always amazing in the workshop how many people came up with a negative connotation for money. And what that usually indicates is some kind of trauma around money. And those people are also the ones who push money away. Maybe they'll get a windfall of money of some sort, but then money is evil, or that's how they think about it. And they subconsciously divest themselves of all their money. And I see that with lawyers too. Everyone's like, why can't I get my practice to, $1 million? And then we start looking at their money habits. And it's because when they do get ahead, they have a tendency to, oh, money is evil. I shouldn't have this. And it manifests itself in that way. And I know that sounds a little woo, but you and I are a little woo sometimes because it really does manifest with what you think about money because it impacts your decisions. Whether you think it does or not. Whether you think, oh no, I'm totally like pros and cons, here's my checklist. Your subconscious is there telling you money is evil or whatever it's telling you about money. And that makes your decisions then follow that path. So it's very interesting to unpack that with people.
So for people who are listening to this, Jen, and they're thinking like, oh, I wonder if I'm struggling financially, or maybe they're an entrepreneur and they say, I've been having a goal that I can't make this financial goal. Sort of what are the ways that people can start to change their way of being around money?
So one thing I like people to do is to write down like everything they spend money on for a month. Like every time you spend anything, write it down. It's not so much you're tracking it. It's because you're intentionally thinking, I have to write this down in my little book. So by the time you get to day 6 or 7, you're like, wait, now I'm thinking about how I'm spending this money and not just pulling out the debit card, pulling out the credit card. Pulling out cash isn't as common these days. We don't spend cash as fast as we spend money on a card. So just intentionally thinking about how do I spend money? Budget is another B word that people don't like. And budget doesn't mean that you have to limit your expenses so much as you have a plan for them. And so I think reframing our mind around like what we want to do with money and your goals, and not focus necessarily on all the horrible things, because there's a lot of financial stress these days too. Making conscious decisions about money. And when you start thinking, oh, I'm going to go spend something, and maybe you have a little nagging feeling, you're like, should I do this? Listen to that little nagging feeling that says, should I consider buying this or not? Should I consider this vacation? Should I consider whatever? And there are a lot of good money coaches out there too. There are really good people who unpack the psychology of this. And if you're open to it, it can be a really good path to go down.
So then what I'm hearing you say then is that everyone has some psychology around money, whether or not you are aware of it. There's some story that happened when they were small, 6, 7 years old, right? And that if you are someone who is like wanting to hit a higher financial goal in your business, or maybe in your personal life, you are struggling all the time and you feel like, I don't know why, but I never can get ahead. I'm always behind. And every time when I just feel like I'm just about to get ahead, my car breaks down or I have to go to the hospital. And like these things that are coming in from the outside, right? Outside influences, you're saying that it's still related to the psychology, because energetically you're like sending out, like sort of explain that when someone feels like it's not my fault. My car broke down, my pet got sick and I had to take them to the vet. So explain how the energy of and your energy around money is somehow impacting, because it does sound woo-woo, right? But
It
like,
does sound woo-woo, yes.
so yeah, so let's talk a little bit about that for people who feel like it's out of their control.
So what a lot of people end up doing is creating an environment where things just happen to them, where maybe a car accident happens. And sometimes it's because, again, I've seen it where people, they get to the point, oh, I have savings in my account, and then something will happen. It's because psychologically, they may have thought, I've never had this before. I don't know what to do with it. I don't deserve it. A lot of it's what I deserve to have. And so things will happen. Of course, there's the financial side and the science side of money, where you have to have savings. You have to plan for the future. But a lot of it is things happen to people. And yes, some of it's unavoidable and it is what it is. But thinking about what can I do to put out in the world what I actually want to get, and not what my little brain's telling me I don't deserve. Because I cannot tell you how many people I've talked to that they are so negative about money, and they get some money and all of a sudden it's gone because they tried some TikTok thing, something, because that's what their brain was telling them to do. So it's really interesting how circumstances happen to people and it takes them back to where they were, because we have that reset point. We have this point in our lives where we reset to.
Interesting. So so that reset point might not even be a good place, but it's your known comfort space.
Yeah. Yes. It's where you feel comfortable at, or even though that place of comfort is very stressful, it's a known feeling. And so we often reset to that. It's a weight loss too. that happens. You reset to a certain weight a lot of times, and you can't get past it because you're just there.
Right, right. So yeah, so how do people change, how to negotiate with yourself, right? So here's random people wondering, like, listening into the podcast and wondering how can they negotiate better if they're not in a place in their life where they want to be, and they don't want to keep going back to the reset place, right? How can we begin to negotiate with ourselves so that we've got different stories to tell ourselves?
I think the first thing to do is be open minded about different ways of thinking. First, I always call it my lawyer brain, because whenever when I first started working in the law, I was always told, oh, you can't do that. Lawyers don't do that. Whenever I come up with a new idea. And now I tell lawyers to turn off their lawyer brain, because that's that piece of our brain that as soon as something is different, your brain shuts down and says, oh, no, I'm not going to consider that. That won't work. And so it's almost like you have to turn off the part of your brain that says no to any ideas. And then be willing to look at like your patterns. What has happened with money? What have you done with it? And a lot of people need help with this. It's not something that you just sit down and you figure out, or you can read a book and figure out. There are good tools, there's good websites, there's good courses out there that walk people through kind of these patterns, because you'll notice definite patterns that will start coming out when it comes to money. And sometimes it's related to relationships, sometimes it's related to health and things like that. But just looking for resources and help is a good start, because most people won't even go that far. And then consciously thinking about what you want to do with money and what you want to have money for and how you can get it. So if your budget is constantly negative, like you're never going to catch up. If there's something there has to change, but you have to actually know what the numbers are. And that's the scary part of money, is that there's numbers involved for people, apparently.
Yeah. So, okay. So, what I'm hearing is that in order to negotiate with yourself, A, you have to know that you're negotiating, like you're about to go into a negotiation, right?
Yes.
With yourself.
Yeah.
Two, that you probably need a coach or some sort of outside help. But three, and this sort of falls in line with like my negotiation strategies, is to prepare by looking up data. And that data is your own money. How much is in your bank account? How much debt do you have? Like, like what does your budget look like month over month? Are you behind every month, or are you coming right at zero every month, right? So collecting that data and actually looking at it.
Yes. Yes. And the data part's the scary part for a lot of people, because it's hard to look at our own stuff objectively. There's all kinds of feelings of guilt and all kinds of whatever you've had in the past with it. It's really hard to be that outside perspective. And that's why I have found I've had money coaches over the years that I've worked with. I've had like just mindset coaches, and it all overlaps, relates so well to everything. But most people need help figuring this out.
This is really fascinating. I mean, I love the fact that, the idea that people can change their own financial lives based on negotiations with themselves, right? That they can maybe change their money habits. But more important than changing money habits, I'm just fascinated by the idea that if you can put yourself in a place where you work on yourself and you change your energy around money, that money will flow. Like if we think about money as the wind, for
Mm-hmm.
example,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that it's flowing around and it's moving and it's shifting. That if you clear, like, how you're walking in a wind tunnel
Yep.
and there's
Yep.
lots of wind because of the way that the rocks are set up and the formation, it's like shifting the wind in that way. Whereas if you walk into a courtyard, there may never be any wind there because it's blocking all the wind by all four. So would you say that that would be a good analogy to talk about the flow of money in your lives?
I think so, because I think a lot of people are in that courtyard where things are blocked. Or you can look at it a couple different ways. You could be in the courtyard and it's calm, and then you have your piles of money sitting around you. Or you could be in the wind tunnel where it's blowing all around you, but you can't get it. But I think the blocks that people put in regarding money that they don't realize they have is probably the biggest thing. And then also, like, I also talk a little bit about toxic positivity sometimes. Like, you have to acknowledge things out there. Like you can't always be 100% positive. You can't always be like, and I know there are people on different social medias again who promote that. You have to be realistic and look at what you are able to accomplish and what you're able to do. And I do find that people then fall sometimes into scams or maybe sales organizations where you're paying money to belong and trying to sell things. I see a lot of that kind of buying into some of this. Well, you can make whatever you want out of yourself. And it's a little deeper than that. It's more about the money and whatever you're blocking and not so much about the business model that you're in.
Interesting. Yeah. So, yeah, this is really interesting. I'm really enjoying this conversation just because it goes, about psychology, which I really love talking about.
And I'm not
And
a psychologist, just to be clear. This is just stuff that I've learned over as working with a lot of people in financial stress.
yeah, I feel like psychology plays a part in many different
Yeah.
arenas, right? Like
Yeah.
you leave the world of psychology, but bring it along to, your legal world or my musician world or the financial world. Like it's constantly following us.
And I'm convinced that the best undergrad degree for a lawyer to have is a psychology degree because it just teaches you so much about people and how they operate. So
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah. I've had experiences where, you know, growing as an entrepreneur when you're just starting, a lot of times you hear, especially women
Yeah.
talking about like, I don't know that I can raise my prices. I feel like
Mm-hmm.
my prices, or they have imposter syndrome and they feel like, well, I don't know that I deserve to
Yeah.
raise my prices and all these things. And so what I find interesting about that is that you can tell energetically how you feel when you say the number out loud. Like if I
Yes.
say, hey, I'm going to charge you X number of dollars per hour, you can feel if that feels uncomfortable for you, or you can feel if there's no charge. It's very interesting because you
It
can just
is.
practice it, right?
Yeah, it's just so funny that we're shifting into that a little bit, that discussion, because that's like a lot of what I do now is convincing lawyers to charge for their services and charge for things that they do. And it's very true. Like if you are able to say your price confidently, that comes across. But if that little voice in the back of your head is saying, no one's going to pay me for this, then no one's going to pay you for it. And I've seen it even with bankruptcy attorneys. They'll often say, this is going to be $1,500 and I know that's a lot of money and I'm so sorry. And I'm like, yeah, no. $1,500 is going to change your life and it is going to get rid of $100,000 of debt. And isn't that a great return on investment for what you're paying? Is how to actually say it. But that imposter syndrome and women and charging for their services is a huge, huge issue out there with psychology.
Yes, definitely. I love that it's a reframing, right? So in negotiation, we talk about reframing things so that it's more palatable, it's more easier to agree to it and that sort of thing. And so I love that fact that you can just reframe it and say, no, it isn't a lot of money considering the value that you're getting. Right. And so sometimes you can, as an entrepreneur, I feel like you can, a lot of times people should do the work, right? People should do the work, the personal growth work, so that they can show up and say, $1,500 for my services is, a really good investment. So I agree with that. And also, if you people don't have the time, I feel like if you just reframe it for yourself and say, you know what? Actually, it is a good deal, $1,500 if you're going to save yourself this, huge debt amount. Or for me as a mediator, like if I were the kind of person to say, well, I really don't feel like I'm worth that. All I have to do is reframe it and say, I'm saving these people a lot of money because otherwise they would go to litigation and spend 100 times that amount.
Exactly.
And so sometimes you can just fast track it, but I want people to kind of try this at home and say different things, the amount of money, or just say numbers out loud, like say $1 million out loud. How does that feel? Does that feel like, or does it feel icky? Or to say, oh, I'm a millionaire. How does that feel? Like they can literally practice it right now to say it out loud. And then if you get a charge, like some kind of a negative energy charge when you say things out loud, then you know that there's something running in your subconscious, right?
Yes. And I also, so when I teach lawyers how to charge for consults and things like that, we do a lot of scripting and messaging because the scripting, it has to be authentic to the person who's doing it, but I make them practice it out loud. And they're like, this is crazy. This is weird. No one does. I'm like, no, because the way you say it and how you come across is not just the words. It's how you're making that person feel while you're doing it. And so, yes, there's a lot of out loud talking and negotiating with yourself before you do take the next step.
That's awesome. You do some similar stuff, right? Because my background's in theater. And so when I work with people, we do a lot of role play. And a lot of the role play is not just to do the role play, it's like rehearsal for real life, right? You're going to rehearse it. And I always tell people it doesn't matter if it's a rehearsal, the impact that you're going to have on me as the listener is the same as it would be if you're doing it like in real life with a potential client. And so, as the coach listening, or you as the consultant listening, you can feel the energy coming up. It is like what I always teach about, which is, non-verbal communication. Like your energy matters. It's not just the energy, it's your tone of voice. It's the choice of words that you use. It's your facial expression. It's your body language. All of that is being received by the person listening. So like you said, if you show up and you're thinking like, I don't want to see this number, I'm very uncomfortable, all of that is getting transmitted to the other person, right?
And I loved it even when clients would come in and they would talk to me and they would say, I feel so much better just talking to you. And that means I had the right energy and the right, like just seeing them calm down about things and be able to relax. That's all that nonverbal communication. It wasn't the words. I stumble over my words. I talk too fast. The words are very little of what we do. And so I think, and identifying that in clients that we're working with is important too when we start thinking about psychology and imposter syndrome and how they approach money. It really comes full circle when you're trying to work with your clients too.
Yeah. And it's really interesting because we talk about how you feel about money is being communicated. And it's the same thing as judgment. If I don't like you, Jen, and I'm talking to you, you're going to pick up on it, right? If I have some judgmental feelings about you, I may never say anything to you directly, but you're going to say, that woman, Alice, like, I don't think she likes me. I could feel something that she was not liking me. So it's the same thing with the money. The same thing is being communicated whether you know it or not, whether you like it or not. So it's really important to fix that, to first recognize that you have some issues with money, or I don't even want to call them issues, right? Because people don't want to consider themselves having an issue.
Some issues. But I also think we live in a society that doesn't talk about money correctly. Like we don't share as much as we probably could, oversharing. Some people overshare. But as a society, we don't talk about like the basics of money. We don't talk about salaries very often unless you're like in a position that salaries are posted for. But I think that also feeds into this of money is this private, secretive, dirty thing that no one talks about.
Right.
And
right.
yeah, that's one of the other issues.
Yeah. And it's not helpful because, for example, it came out a few years ago about how, no one's comparing your salaries at work, so that the employers can like really discriminate against the employees by giving somebody really huge amounts of money. I mean, that came out, right? It came out several years ago where they're like, oh, this is what's happening. But the reason why people didn't know it was happening for a long time is because what you said, people are not talking about what they're making with their colleagues.
And where did that start? When we were 6 or 7 years old, our parents talking about money behind closed doors and thinking we couldn't hear it and thinking it must be a secretive thing. And I think it just has perpetuated over generations of money is somehow a taboo subject.
The other thing that I noticed as well is that there's a lot of, like say, just for example, this is slightly moving over to taxes, but it has to do with money, right? Is that people don't all openly talk about all the ways that they're saving money or they're like, saving on their taxes. It's sort of like just hush hush. Yeah. So then if you start as an entrepreneur to make more money, suddenly you're looking around going, no one has said anything like what is everyone else doing? Right? Because it's not dinner table conversation. Even if you go out and network, people are not necessarily talking in when I say mixed company, what I mean is like mixed financial company.
Yes. Yeah.
Some people are making a lot of money and some people are not. They're maybe like once they get to be like millionaires, billionaires, they might be talking about these things, but when you're in a networking group where people are not making the same amount of money, there is not this open dialogue about, hey, make sure you check this out. This will help you save money, or you should invest in that because this will help you. Like, there isn't that conversation, right?
There isn't. And I also think that a lot of people fake it, because I had a lot of clients that came from my networking groups and things like that. And so people would think that they were wildly successful, but then I knew their actual finances. And so I think some of it comes from that people are going to look down on me if they know that I don't have $1 million or something like that. So I think we worry so much about what other people think, and no one is thinking about you. Correct. Not to be rude, but no one's thinking about you. They're only thinking about themselves and what everyone else is thinking of them, that we don't have time to worry about someone else. And so no one talks about these things because they don't want to appear to be the uneducated one or the one in the room. And so finding really good advisors, especially as an entrepreneur, and having a tax planning person, I can't emphasize that highly enough, because we all like to DIY things. Lawyers are the worst about this. We tell our clients don't DIY it, and then we go DIY everything. Tax is not the place to DIY, and money is not really the place to DIY. Have someone that you mesh with, that you fit their vibe, you fit their energy, and use them as the resources that they are. And you'll get a lot further ahead paying for good advice than you would have trying to do it yourself or losing money.
Yeah, definitely. And, if there's one place that people should be spending money, it's with their money experts, right? With whether it's financial coaches or the CPAs or the tax strategists, like all of those people help you grow the wealth that you hopefully believe that you deserve.
Yes.
Yeah.
My only cautionary there is just make sure they're qualified, because there's no licensing for financial coaches. I've seen a lot of interesting. My clients as bankruptcy clients were often overwhelmed with decision making. Like your psychology, when you're overwhelmed, you shut down, fatigue, insomnia, all kinds of things happen to you, and you make bad decisions, not because you are a bad decision maker, but because you're so overwhelmed, that's what you choose. And I've seen them choose debt settlement companies because they see a late night television commercial, and that's in the middle of their insomnia that night. And so having those experts and resources that are qualified are really important. Can't stress that enough.
Do you have any advice for my listeners as to, when you say make sure you vet them, make sure you find somebody good, what are some of the questions they should be asking?
Well, I always like personal referrals. That's usually the best way. Someone who's actually used that person before and has actually used them, and they're not trying to get a number in a referral game type situation that they're working on. That's the challenge, is figuring that out. But then asking them, what their background is. Ask them what they think about money. If you're talking to a money coach, how did they learn about money? What's their background? And find out whether and they may not have an MBA or a finance. That's not that important when it comes to a money coach. It's more the psychology side of things. So I think asking them what their background is, how many people they've worked with, success stories are a good thing to ask, but anyone can make those up. That's my problem these days, especially with AI. I swear, AI makes up so much stuff, hallucinates things. And so you have to really check around and look into and find the people that fit your style. Don't try to cram yourself into someone else's style. And also have the backup, have the resources that you need. If you are a spreadsheet person, find someone who works with you with spreadsheets. If you are a verbal, you only learn by hearing things, find the coach that works with you on your level of learning and not a blueprint. I hate blueprints because one size does not fit all.
Yeah. So one more thing I wanted to ask you about, we talked about people's feelings about money and how a lot of times people just want to ignore what's uncomfortable. Yes. And so I want you to talk a little bit about the uncomfortableness of actually engaging with your bank statements or credit card statements on a regular basis, just not living your life by not looking at it. Can you talk a little bit more about how that will be helpful?
There's an interesting statistic, which I know you can make statistics say anything you want. I get that. But I do like data. And it shows that people who check their credit scores have higher credit scores. People who track their own credit scores have. And it's not because they're checking, it's because they're paying attention to it. And that's why it trends up to higher credit scores. Because when you're paying attention to it, you're like, oh, my credit score went down 15 points. What happened? You start educating and figuring it out, because credit scores are a game. anyone can play the game. You don't have to be rich. You can be minimum wage. You could have an 850 credit score. Understanding that checking and paying attention to things results in a better result, just in increased results. Like just that check-in can help you. And then you can make it a game. I know we're gamifying a lot of things these days, but there's apps that will help you make it a game if you want to use an app for it. And I don't know what they are off the top of my head, but I've seen them out there. Different employers have different things too with their financial literacy stuff. But also make a date with yourself, with your partner to go through money, because that's the number one cause for relationship stress is money. And so whoever you're working with, whether it's a business partner, relationship that you're in, even your kids, like my kids and I, we have started business Sunday at our house. And on Sundays, what they do is they pick a business they're going to start. We talk about the money that would be involved in starting it up, what they would charge for services, what expenses they may not have thought of, like how they could do it. And so we just do Start a Business Sunday because it just makes them think about money and how to make it and not make it a taboo subject. So whether it's weekly or monthly, just look at the bank statements and you'll also find there's a whole bunch of subscriptions out there that you don't really need. I hate that whenever I go through, like twice a year, I'll go through and look at my credit card statements and do the subscription thing. I'm like, why am I paying for this stuff? You find out you're paying for the same subscription on two different cards because you have two different accounts. So there's little wins in there too when you start looking at things.
Yeah. That's really important because it's like you said, where you put your attention is what grows, right? So if you put your attention on money and focus on how to improve your habits, how to get rid of those subscriptions, where are you spending where you don't have to be spending, that's where you can kind of get your life together. But if you just ignore it because it feels like it's already out of control, that's the whole negotiation with yourself and money. It's to say to yourself, okay, I need to negotiate that no matter how uncomfortable I am, if I want my situation to improve, I really need to put my focus and energy there, right? So that you can fix things, or like you said, even with looking at your credit score, right? Just because like you said, it's kind of gamified. It tells you like, oh, if you've got this amount of revolving credit and then you've paid off this amount. I mean, there's sort of like these rules that you can follow if you get super curious and look into what do you have to do to get your credit score to go up. It's sort of like out there, right?
It's a total game. Yeah. And you're not your credit score, by the way. Speaking of psychology, there are so many people who think that they are their credit score. Like that's their sole identifier. And credit score is a number that can be gamed by anybody who wants to game it.
Right. So what's one last bit of advice that you could give the listeners about their psychology with money?
Think how you think about money. Like what's the first word that comes to your mind? Like what really is the first word that comes to your mind when the word money is said? And see what your reaction is, because that will tell you a lot of where you need to start. If it is icky or the root of all evil, when someone says, what do you think of money to me? Fun is what I usually say. That's usually my response. So it isn't a negative for me, but that would be my first step. Don't have to hire a coach. Don't have to just, when someone says the word money, what's your immediate response to it? And then put a calendar entry on your calendar to sit down and look through your finances and figure out where to start, because it's overwhelming if you say, I'm going to take 10 credit card statements and 10 bank statements. And that's a lot to look at. But just take one bite and start looking at a piece of it. And then you can start organizing it out from there. It's really hard to do like an overwhelming chunk all at once if you're just starting.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being on the show today. This was a fascinating conversation. Always something that I love talking about is psychology. Yeah. And if someone wanted to work with you, if lawyers are looking, how can they contact you?
So my website is lawyersuccessnetwork.com. That's probably the easiest way to find me.
Wonderful. And for my listeners, if you want to learn more about Jen Lee and what she's doing, you can check out her show notes. And thank you for being here with us today, Jen.
Thank you for the fun conversation, Alice.
All right. And listeners, thanks again for tuning in to yet another episode of Negotiation with Alice. Until next time.